Tēnā koutou, greetings. My name's Silvia Purdie, and I am delighted to be hosting this Zoom on dealing with conflict with Brett Mann. And I met Brett when we lived down in Christchurch. Brett is just brings this body of intelligence and insight and real practical wisdom through a variety of contexts, particularly in the medical profession, but also in other forms of leadership. Brett's now going on to train as a mediator and has just it's a wonderful calling to bring training in this area, particularly to the church, but also in other spaces as well. I'd just like to open with a short scripture. I thought I'd keep it, go back to the Psalms, Psalm 46. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. He says, "Be still and know that I am God." In Te Reo Māori, kia āta noho, kia mātou ko ahau te atua. So over to you, Brett.
Hey, Marie, koutou. Good to be with you, and nice to hear a little bit about who you are and what the context is that you're working in. 18 months ago, I finished 40 years as a general practitioner, and 20 of those was as a medical educator, focusing primarily on communication skills training and running 40 weeks a year, running a reflective practice group for an hour and a half a week and many hours one-to-one supervision with doctors. And it occurred to me not long into that just how applicable this was. Not, of course, doctors are a helping professional, and it's actually relevant what we're talking about this afternoon to all helping professionals. And yes, the medical side will have one or two bits that are unique to that, and other contexts will have one or two things that are unique to that. But there's so much of that that is just generic. And when we're dealing with people, conflict is a normal part of our experience. There was nothing in the general practice training program about dealing with conflict, and I got that introduced, and that's been in the program now for almost 20 years. And a lot of the supervision that I've been doing is dealing with conflict, and that's not because of a specific focus on that. It's just really common, and it's a normal part of life. So I'm currently providing one-to-one supervision for 9 or 10 Christian leaders, and I'm very pleased to have just got a group started for people on the pastoral staff for Grace Vineyard. And I'm very keen over the next 10 years or so to see group supervision become much more part of the church culture, because group supervision will do things that one-to-one can't do, and one-to-one does things that groups can't do. But we need to add that in. And of course, if you look at Jesus, his norm was actually group reflection, group supervision, and a few one-to-one conversations on the side. So I'm keen to see that happen, and I'm also an affiliate member of Arbitration and Mediation Institute of New Zealand. I've had significant experience helping at least 12 professionals and one church leader here in Christchurch more recently, dealing with complaints, vexatious or otherwise, mistakes, error. None of us are perfect, and sometimes things happen that have unforeseen consequences. And the focus there is mainly on helping people manage the psychological dynamics, the intrapersonal psychological dynamics, as well as awareness of the interpersonal ones. But conflict can be so devastating and so wounding down the high end, and increasingly there's a bit more of a complaints culture out there, and we can be on the receiving end of that. and it's painful. So I'm very pleased to help people through that. So if anybody's after this discussion today is wanting some supervision or conflict coaching, or even interested in group supervision, then I'm open to discussion about that face-to-face processes or doing the supervision online. So I think, as we've already been hearing today, conflict is normal. And of course, it's inevitable because we have different personalities, we have different roles, different past experiences, different psychological wrinkles, and tender areas that get triggered with conflict, or just with ordinary daily interaction. So we've got the smaller, just the disjunctions that happen between people, and then we've got the more right through to the more high-end conflicts and complaints. And of course, none of us are perfect. We're all fallible, including the person who's criticizing you. And sometimes that's important to keep in focus when we're if we're being attacked. So this morning we're focusing, or this afternoon we're focusing on the interpersonal conflict, and I'm going to give you three strategies for dealing with common issues related to conflict that pop up in groups. And my hope and aim is for us today to take away 3, 4, 5 things that you'll find useful, practical, and you can put into practice. Now, having said that, it's axiomatic with communication skills training that head knowledge is one thing and practice is another. And to get things out of your head actually into your default settings inside so that they actually start to come out automatically definitely does require some commitment. So maybe it might be um, reminding yourself to, if when there's a conflict, before you disagree with what the other person is saying, remind yourself to agree first with what they're saying and then disagree. And if that's your task that you're working on, maybe you put a little desktop sticker on your desk at work, agree before disagreeing. And just so you see it there each day and you just gradually get it into your default settings. So it does require some application. If, as I'm talking this afternoon, there are things that are not clear, then do feel free just to put a note in the chat. Silvia will keep an eye on that, and then I can clarify. In the Gospels, Jesus had at least 24 conflicts, and those are the only ones that the Gospel writers wrote about. No doubt there were plenty of others, and that was in his 3-year ministry. The Apostle Paul in the New Testament, there's at least 25 recorded conflicts, greater or lesser depending on how you count them, and no doubt many more that were not recorded. And at least 7 or 8 of those were significant church leaders, other apostles. And the fact that we're meant to be mature people certainly doesn't mean we don't have some conflicts and some pretty big ones at times. Paul had significant conflicts with 3 whole churches, the Galatians, the Philippians, and of course the famous Corinthians, who had conflict all over the place. So we're going to tuck into looking at some uh, strategies that can be helpful for us in dealing with that. In church and work contexts, we can have conflict in all these areas: vision, direction, leadership, governance, power struggles. You can see them all there. Now, there's a spiritual discipline associated with dealing with conflict. And
Sorry,
before
sorry,
we,
Brett. Were you showing your slides?
yes.
I'm not seeing them.
Oh, is that right? Okay. So I wonder what's happened there.
Try sharing again.
Try sharing again. Sorry, folks.
I can put them up from my end if it's glitched out on you.
What's happened there? Sorry, Sylvia, I'm not sure what's happened there. Are you able to, maybe if I just, let's have a look. What's that? No, it's not it.
Yep, now I can put them up.
Okay, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. So I'll just get you to, oh, here we are. I think we're going, oops. Sorry, folks.
There you go. Dealing with conflict. So that's the
Okay, you've got that one?
um, and then
So we'll just let people have a look at that dealing with conflict slide.
conflict is normal.
Conflict is normal. That was a really important message for me to get into my head because I was shocked and devastated, and somehow I was operating with this assumption that that if there's conflict, then there's something abnormal happening, and it's probably my fault. I'll touch a bit more on that later. Before we go further, next slide. There is a spiritual discipline associated with dealing with conflict, and Jesus said in Matthew 5. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. And in the Beatitudes, the other one where it's specifically associated with being a child of the Father is about being a peacemaker. So what Jesus is saying here, and I think we often overlook this, that he's actually saying part of the family likeness of the people who are sons and daughters of Father in heaven is one of the unique things about us is we love our enemies and we pray for those who persecute us. We pray for those who we're in conflict with. Just like your children bear some of your likeness, the family likeness, and the family of God, the family likeness that the children bear is like the father. They love their enemies and pray for those who persecute them or who they're in conflict with. And I've been making it a habit, which I'm still working on, but it's becoming just almost now second nature. When I'm in conflict with somebody's irritating me, I find myself just thinking negative thoughts towards somebody that there's been an issue with, of just to turn it round and direct goodwill and pray for that person and just lift them up towards the light, to pray for our enemies, to intend goodwill to them when we're actually feeling quite the opposite because of anger. So what we're going to do at the moment, rather than just talk about that, we're actually going to do it. And I want you to, we just take a minute or two just to stop and think about somebody you've been in conflict with over the last week or so, maybe a long-standing conflict in your family, at work, or whatever it is. And we're just going to take a moment to lift them up towards the light um, with positive intention for them to grow, heal what's broken in them, and for God to bless them in some way. So let's, as children of the Father, let's do that right now. Okay. Next slide. This is one way of dealing with conflict. And possibly that might be the first reaction sometimes that comes to mind. But as leaders, we need to be, next slide, increasingly skilled at managing conflict in healthy ways for our own health um, and the health of the mission of God through the various works and ministries that we're involved with. Of course, dealing with conflict is usually uncomfortable. It's frequently, more often than not, anxiety provoking. And for some of us, it can be very scary, as it used to be for me. I was fairly quickly on the edge of feeling like I could decompensate with moderate or high-end conflict. And I was very insecure about it. And I'll touch on why that was a little bit later. But conflicts managed well also can be an opportunity for personal growth, both for us and the other person. And a healthy creative tension takes us beyond our own limited perspectives and work and ministry, helping us to make better decisions for more effective outcomes. And so for us as leaders in one way or another, growing up into the fullness of the stature of Christ absolutely includes our capacity to love our enemies and for that to become a norm for us and a normal response to conflict and become more skilled in dealing with conflict. And for many of us, increasing our skills in dealing with conflict will be one of the biggest things that we can do to reduce stress levels in the various work and ministries that we're involved with. And also for us who tend to be avoiders, which is often um, many people in discussions like this, the ministries are compromised because we avoided a conflict that actually needed to be addressed. They're not as effective. Things come unstuck. So particularly for leaders, really important for us to muscle up into the Rose form of Jesus, the Silvia form of Jesus, the Brett expression of Jesus, and becoming more like Christ, not just in some of the other character areas, but particularly in this one, and how we respond to conflict, such a common part of life. So some of the benefits, next slide. Less stress. I have far less stress now with conflicts than I once did because I know what I'm doing. I've got my own stuff sorted out. I know how to respond to it. And my stress levels have gone down markedly. More authentic relationships, safety across a wider range of relationships. So when we've had a conflict, and we've survived it, and there's been something, it's been resolved, worked out. You then know that your relationship is safe across a wider range, not just this range, but actually we can go out here and we're still okay and we can still be connected. And that's a good feeling. Greater vitality in our groups. One of the things that devitalizes groups, de-energizes them, is the unaddressed conflicts, the things that need to be addressed that haven't been addressed. And yes, it's a challenge dealing with the conflict, but the end result will, when the conflict's handled well enough, will be greater vitality in our groups. Robust, loving community, and not least, resilience against the forces of darkness. Um, the New Testament is Paul draws connections between the forces of darkness and conflict. And I think, most of us know of ministries and that have fallen over because conflict wasn't addressed adequately and frequently avoided or dealt with by the person's fuse blowing, they're blowing their top, and all sorts of damage caused along the way. Often because the lesser forms of that conflict have been avoided. And the dark side can really get into that and exploit it. So it's important also for that reason. And the result hopefully is more effective mission and in our communities. Next slide. So in Ephesians 4, Paul's writing to the Ephesians, and this letter doesn't have any specific greetings to people, and the scholars say that this letter was almost certainly a circular that went to the Christians in Ephesus and around the Asia Minor house churches. And in Ephesians 4, Paul talks about speaking the truth in love. Make every effort to preserve the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. Every effort. That's possibly quite a high bar, isn't it? But we're going to have some more skills, hopefully, and more understanding at the end of this session about how we put that effort in constructive ways. But it takes effort to preserve the unity of the spirit. And that's what we need to muscle up for it. And I've loathed doing that myself and pray these crazy prayers like, Lord, help me get better dealing with conflict because felt so inadequate with it. And it hurts and it's difficult. And initially, you're not doing it so well. But we learn by practice. We mostly don't learn about this by simply reading a book. We actually have to put in the effort and actually work it out. Make every effort to preserve the unity of the spirit and the bond of peace, speaking the truth in love. It's interesting, isn't it, that the church in the New Testament with the most conflict, which was the Corinthian church, that's the church where 1 Corinthians 13 about love was it was in that context. It was in the context of a lot of conflict. And though you can see there on the slide, um, next slide, Silvia, if you haven't flicked over already. Issues around leadership, issues between rich and poor, issues about certain processes in the church. They were taking out legal action against each other, rivalry over spiritual gifts, confusion about sexuality issues, and lack of leadership there. And it's to that church that Paul writes the chapter on love. Next slide. So 1 Corinthians 13, we know it very well. Love is patient, love is kind, it's not proud, it doesn't dishonor others, it's not easily angered. It always protects, and sometimes, particularly when we're having challenging conversations with people where we need to raise an issue that is where there's inappropriate behavior or there's some significant adjustment required, we need to be mindful of protecting them from feeling too devastated, because just like some of us will feel a bit devastated in conflict, then of course others can on the receiving end. And we'll talk about some of the things that can help with that. And if we go to the rest of the New Testament, we can expand what's in 1 Corinthians 13. Love is gentle, love is quick to listen. And also, love can be very firm, strong, decisive when needed. Next slide. So, superficial unity looks on the surface like things are okay, but conflict is generally avoided or only managed when we can't possibly avoid it. That unity is fragile. We deal with the conflict and sometimes the creative tension between different points of view and perspectives, and we get to the other side. We've got a much deeper unity where the conflict has been addressed. The decisions are more robust. The community is more robust and there's more effective ministry. So we'll only give a little for superficial unity on this side of conflict, and we'll give everything for the deeper unity on the other side of conflict, which is really where the most effective ministry is going to occur. So let's look at at the natural responses to conflict and at how they often interfere with resolving conflict in healthy ways. So we probably all know this, but just for the sake of completeness, we have a fight-flight response. I'm either going to fight you off, or I'm going to flee and run away from it. Sometimes when you can't fight or flee, you go into a freeze response. And then other times a tend and befriend response. And I noticed that so tend and befriend responses are a bit more prevalent with females for some good and biological reasons. But I noticed the tend and befriend response in myself. And for most of us, if we're people pleasers, like is my natural default setting, our tend and befriend response will be overactive and needs putting in its place. So fight, flight, freeze, tend, and befriend. And these work out into generally these four different patterns. Some people would say five, and they'd put another category there, compromise, which I'm putting under the pleasing category. And we can say a bit more about that perhaps a little bit later. So I'm guessing that with those of us here today, there'll be a number of us, perhaps out of let's say out of 20 people, there's probably going to be two or three usually who'll be pretty classic avoiders. There'll be two or three whose default setting tends to be attack. And attack is not a bad thing. There's a place for all of these things, avoiding, attacking, negotiating, resolving, and pleasing. But we'll tend to have a default setting towards pleasing or attacking or avoiding. And we're doing those behaviors in situations where it's not appropriate and where something else is required. So the people pleasers will probably be the majority of us. And we're all hoping and working towards becoming negotiators and resolvers where we're doing justice to the conflict and we're dealing with it in a mature and Christ-like way. But that's certainly a journey to get there. How do you know you're people pleasing? When you're people pleasing, there's a sense in which you know on the inside you're compromising yourself. You haven't really said what you need to say. You haven't really said what you think. And of course, there's times not to say exactly what you think, but this is a time where there is a need to say what I think, and you're not doing it. And your integrity is compromised. And it feels like there's more of the other person and less of you present in the room. And the end result of that is when you're in the interaction, you feel weak. You feel like you've weakened yourself, you've compromised yourself. And as an inveterate in the past, people pleaser myself, the task has been to, and still is, and getting better, is not to say things that make me feel weak, not to say things that I know I'm compromising my integrity, I'm compromising my sense of power in ways that are inappropriate because I'm anxious about what might come back. So the avoiders need to front up and engage with the conflict. The attackers really need to make room for the other person, not dominate them, and learn to be much more empathic and to listen very carefully before attacking. One of the good things about attackers is that they're generally not easy to push around. They're not easily manipulated. People pleasers, on the other hand, are much easier to manipulate. Next slide. So I think many of us will understand the concept of transference. There's nothing like conflict to activate transfer of thoughts and emotions from past relationships into the present one. For myself, when I was in a more significant conflict, it would activate thoughts and feelings from the past, and particularly one situation as a child, probably 10, 11, 12, somewhere in there, I'm not quite sure, when I had a conflict with my mother and she didn't talk to me for 3 days. And the message was, and she was doing nothing to resolve the conflict. I interpreted that as it's all my fault and it's entirely up to me to put it right. And the relationship has gone back to zero. So when there was significant conflict in my practice in the early days, I would feel like the relationship's gone to zero with this person. It's all up to me to put it. It's all up to me to put it right. It's all my fault. So that was really unhelpful when conflicts arose. And I could just feel the decompensation just sitting there right beside me, that I could, fall apart. So I was transferring thoughts and emotions from the past into the present. And when we're in conflict, many of us will have we find this sort of excessive emotional response, strong negative thoughts. And we know in the moment that this is interfering with a healthy, mature interaction with this other person. When that's happening, that's the alert that we're almost certainly transferring thoughts and emotions from past issues into this current situation. I also used to, is that example relevant? Perhaps not so relevant. On one occasion, giving this talk, I asked, we are talking about transference, and I asked people what they fear when there is a conflict. I feared the relationship going back to zero. I feared the fact that it was all up to me to put it right, and it's all my fault. It was very anxiety provoking. One person said, "Oh, I fear violence." And I said, this was a doctor, and I said, "Well, so who does this remind you of? How far back can you go in your life when you had an experience that was associated with a fear of violence?" And this person was well into their 50s and associated back to a situation when he was 7 or 8. He was out with his father on the farm. His father got angry with one of the sheep on the farm, and he just punched the sheep in the head, and the sheep dropped dead on the ground. And he'd been carrying this anxiety when for 40 years. So situations with conflict activated the thoughts and emotions from that, the fear of violence, just as he'd seen with his father, who out of the blue and with no warning as far as the child was concerned, and bang, there's a violent response. And this fear of violence could happen, and it could happen when I'm not aware, not haven't had any warning about it. So very, very limiting and really ratcheting up the anxiety in terms of dealing with conflict. So some of us will benefit from seeing a psychologist or a therapist to sort some of that out. But if you recognize in yourself some excessive emotion that really is just putting you right out on the edge, then when you're dealing with conflict, you're almost certainly dealing with some transferential issues, and they can be sorted out. Who does this remind me of? As far back as I can remember. So in this picture here, the priest is having a conflict with an older man. That's reminding her of a conflict back in her childhood with her father. And this interaction with this man in the present is activating the thoughts and emotions from past relationships. So the sort of feelings and emotions that come up for you when you're having a conflict, and just maybe getting a bit of paper and just writing down what your thoughts, fears, emotions are associated with that. Just let them, as you stop and think about it, just let them surface and have a look at them and see if some of those you can actually track back to the past. Who does that remind me of? What does that remind me of from the past? And sometimes it takes a lot more than that, but sometimes even just that will help us identify some of our transferential issues.
Brett, I was just going to chip in to say that it's not even our own experience necessarily. Like, I think some of my attitudes to conflict are more related to my mother's experience of conflict
Yes,
or her parents. So these can be intergenerational as well, I think.
absolutely. And sometimes there's a sort of a vicarious um, experience of other people who are close to us, and what conflict has meant for them, and we may identify with that and end up taking some of that on board. I've had been off to see the psychotherapist for 2 series of psychotherapy sessions to deal with my issues with conflict, and it was just enormously helpful and very, very freeing. Some of the best money we ever spend on our health total is actually on our emotional and psychological health. And as leaders, frequently I think it's reasonable if you go and see the psychotherapist or the psychologist, you can put it under the category of supervision because it's work related and it's a tax deductible expense. Okay, so next slide, rules of engagement. So number one, bring the conflict into the open. Avoiders, when the conflict needs to be dealt with, bring it out into the open. If you've got something that you need to say to somebody that is sensitive, then it's very good to ask permission first, particularly if it's somebody who is you work with, who's beside you in the authority structure or below you in the authority structure. But just asking permission, even with your wife, husband, or partner, if there's something you need to raise and and it's kind of out of the blue, then asking permission, would it be okay to ask for us to talk about this? And when you ask permission, you're communicating a whole lot. Just asking permission is communicating respect. It's communicating you realize this is a sensitive issue and you're going to tread carefully and be gentle about it. So the research is actually very clear on this. If you've got something sensitive that you want to discuss with somebody who works with you, it might be a client, um, and sometimes family members, that asking permission is greatly appreciated and sets that conflict discussion off on a healthy footing. Address the power dynamic. So the person who is raising an issue with somebody else, and especially in our work or ministry context, if we've got to raise something with somebody, then we are in the position of power. And depending on what the issue is, um, we need to be pretty careful about that. So you're in a position of power to some degree, even if you're sometimes raising a conflict with your boss, but particularly if it's somebody you work with or somebody who's below you in the hierarchy. So you're going to think about, where are we going to have this discussion? We need to have this challenging conversation. Where are we going to have it? Well, if you're the priest in a church, or the pastor, the minister, you're not going to have that conflict. You're not going to have that discussion in your office because there's too much power associated with that. So you're going to have it in a more neutral space. It might be somewhere else in the building. It might even be at the cafe down the road. And one of the really powerful things to say when you're having a challenging conversation, say about somebody's inappropriate behavior, is at some point, um, John, we all make mistakes. Me too. We're all imperfect. We're all in this together. And you just dethrone the power of it, and it becomes an adult to adult interaction without this dominating power relationship. And that can be very helpful. Um, through the conversation, or even at the end of the conversation. Two people equally present, each person's ideas, concerns, feelings listened to. And sometimes somebody will be a bit shocked, even a bit devastated because of their own transferential issues. When you raise an issue with them that needs to be discussed, or there's an adjustment required, and you may well have to just draw them out so that their thoughts, feelings, ideas about it are as present equally as possible in the space. Two people, neither one dominating the other, and neither being suppressed or minimized. And attackers, that's important to remember. And for people pleasers, sometimes you'll need to be more present. Agree as much as possible with what somebody's said before you disagree with them. Then I know you've heard me. So if you just disagree straight away, I don't necessarily know that you've heard what I said. So agree with what I've said first, and then tell me about what you disagree with. That can be very helpful, because people not feeling heard in a conflict just frequently increases the conflict and pours petrol on the fire. Connect through empathy not
Sorry,
colluding.
Brett, I was just going to chip in with a
Yes,
little case
please do.
example. I'm dealing with a young couple. I'm counselling a young couple at the moment, and it's it's fascinating kind of watching their dynamic. And you know, he was saying they were trying to analyze their conflict, and he was saying that he'd said, I just don't feel like you're hearing me," and she immediately goes, "Yes, but." So all of their interactions with each other start with yes, but, and I was doing my best to calmly and clearly communicate to them that if they could possibly create some emotional space before the but to ask specifically, you know, they were like, "Well, what does that sound like specifically?" They said, and I said, "Well, it might sound like, tell me more about that."
Yes,
And it might start like I statements rather than yes, but so their pattern is yes, but you dot dot
yes,
dot.
exactly. So tell me more about that. And when they've told you, agree with what the bits that they've said that you can authentically agree with, and then talk about the other bit. And that can just make it the process of the conflict much easier. Connect through empathy, not collusion. That's a little bit related in some ways to agreeing before disagreeing. Connect with the other person through empathy, not by colluding. And people pleasers, when we tend to diminish ourselves and be less present in the conversation, not say what we really need to say, not being sufficiently authentic. Um,
So can you
we're actually,
define collusion? What do you mean by
so
collusion?
collusion means going along with, seeming to go along with more of what the other person has said than is um, than is appropriate.
So you mean
And
like pretending to agree?
you're pretending to agree, yes,
Hmm.
rather than actually muscling up and actually saying what you think. And it's easier to do to be authentic. Now, of course, in a conflict, we're not going to say everything that we think or everything that we feel. We don't need to do that. But there are bits that we know we need to say, we know we need to express, and actually we're not doing it. We're kind of shrinking away, or we're saying it, but we're not saying it in a sufficiently um, appropriate, which may mean forceful, clear way. So, and we maintain a little bit more connection with the other person, but we've compromised ourselves, and it's not helpful. So we connect through empathy. So you can, of course, empathy is as Jesus did, is putting himself in our shoes and actually walking the walk that we walk. We can't do that as he did. We have to imagine ourselves in the other person's shoes. But even with somebody you highly disagree with, you find objectionable, you can connect through empathy and express your understanding of what they're thinking and feeling. And you do that first, and then you can say your point of view and what you disagree with. But agree as much as possible first, empathize with the other person's position, and then say what you've got to say. And it's easier to say what you've got to say when you've done that. Easier for them and easier for you. Easier for them to listen and easier for you to be heard. So those two things can make a big difference.
Can you
I
give us an
state,
example of how to actually flag I don't agree when we're our typical pattern is collusion? That's something I've had to like teach myself, or like, and also if you get the emotional flooding, it's actually quite hard in the moment.
oh, it
You kind of
is.
lose that clarity. So I've had to try to teach myself to say, even if all I can say is, "I'm sorry, but I don't actually agree with you."
Yes.
And maybe that's kind of enough. You like feels like I'm staking something, even if I'm not actually up for having the saying, you know, actually grappling with the conversation, just simply saying, I'm not, I don't actually agree with you, sorry.
So when the flooding's there, Sylvia, usually there's transferential stuff
Yeah.
going on. And we also may be identifying with the other person's projection. So they're projecting the problem onto us, and we know that we're imperfect. And so we kind of just end up taking it lock, stock, and barrel, and we're just flooded with emotion. So some of the subtleties with that certainly benefit from the a few sessions with the psychotherapist or the psychologist. So I if so an example might be well, one immediate example that comes to mind, um, it's perhaps a little bit beside the point, but if I'm having a challenging conversation with somebody, I'll empathize with their position and say, look, I know this is a difficult conversation. This is really uncomfortable, and I can see that you're thinking along this line, and you've got some good reasons as far as they're concerned. You've got some good reasons for why you think that, and you think this and you think that, and if we only do that, this will happen. But I've got a different point of view, and I see it this way. So I wonder and you say your bit, but you've done that after connecting with what they've said, agreeing, showing some empathy for it. And it might be, and I know this is really frustrating for you because I've got a very different perspective on that. And it's difficult for us to manage that. And I will also express confidence, and I think we can find a way through.
I really like that phrasing. I've got a different perspective. Like
Yes.
it's better than what I said about I don't agree with you, but that's more confrontative. I like that. I've got a
Yes, and
different
it's
perspective.
as we practice the conflicts, um, then we'll bit by bit we'll find ourselves refining the words just to the words that like I've got a different perspective rather than disagree, which is a little bit more, as you say, Sylvia, is a bit more confronting. So I statements versus you statements. It might be, let's say, the worship leader has his hands in his pockets when he's worshiping up the front of the church, and you want to have a challenging conversation with him because some people have said, "Oh, I think this worship leader seems to be a bit too casual and um, about it. Seems good-hearted, but he's also a bit casual." So it might be something along the lines of. Um, John, I'm concerned that your heart for worship and your desire to lead people into worship um, is is not going to be so successful because I notice you quite often have your hands in your pockets, and that probably doesn't is not significant for you, but I'm sure that some of the other people in the church are going to think, oh, he's a bit casual, he's a bit relaxed about this, not taking it seriously. And I'm concerned that the benefit of your ministry is to the church is going to be a wee bit is going to be a bit compromised about that. I wonder what you think about that. And so the I am concerned rather than you shouldn't put your hands in your pockets when you're worshiping or whatever it is. You talk too much or you're not giving enough of a lead, whatever it is. The I am concerned is an adult to adult interaction, whereas you should do this or you need to do that. It's a bit of a parent-child. It's a power dynamic operating in a greater way, and it's less respectful, and it's not inviting conversation as much as I am concerned that, which is a statement of care, whereas you should or you need to, is a bit persecutory and just will make that interaction a bit more inflammatory than it needs to be. Another strategy is to de-intensify the interpersonal space. So if somebody's in the church or organization has a conflict with you over something and you disagree with their point of view, quite often you can de-intensify the interpersonal space. You can um, put an anti-inflammatory there by just appealing to a wider authority. So churches usually in this situation do this, or organizations in this situation of the sort that we are, would normal practice would be to do this. Um, and sometimes to deal with a conflict, it may be that you want to actually, where it's appropriate, actually just to check in with the wider authorities about it so that you can use that phrase. So then the conflict is not between me and you, but this conflict is you and normal practice over here, or you and church policy, not just me and you. So that's surprisingly useful and can be used surprisingly often.
I really like the reference to policies. There's some of us are real people, and we kind of get bored with policies. But when you have a conflict, the policies are great. Like I'm just dealing with a conflict of interest situation at the moment with an organization. And that's where you need a policy. Like, what is our
Yes,
organizational policy on how we handle conflicts of interest? It takes it out of being, one person in the wrong necessarily.
yes,
Makes it like this is how we deal with things together.
yes. And so that the person doesn't have to, the focus of the attention is not just on you, but it's diffused out to the wider authority.
I
And
do
of
feel a
course,
little triggered by that, the church's user-led business, because I've been in situations where people use that the wrong way, which is to say, lots of people have told me in the church that they have a problem with you. That's sort of making it a third-party conflict. Oh gosh, that annoys me.
that's very inappropriate. And of course, in that situation, you're just poisoning a whole lot of other relationships potentially. And in that situation where that's happened, you'd be much more likely to use an "I am concerned that" statement and not bombard them with lots of people have said. That's a good qualifier, Silvia. And in all these situations, there's a bit of an art to it, and you'll have a sense of what's generally what's not appropriate to say. And of course, apologize if needed. Some people, our society seems to have got worse at apologizing, and then you have some people who apologize so much it's almost like they're apologizing for their existence. And we're coming to the end. One more thing, and then we're going to talk about groups briefly, and then Q&A. When you're severely criticized and attacked by a person, the rule is, first of all, is it's all about them. This is not about me. This is all about you. I will remember being attacked by an elder's wife in a church leadership time some years ago. And I didn't realize this at the time, but really the issue that she had with me was all about her and not about me. But she didn't own it, so it was projected onto me. And if you assume when somebody really gets stuck into you and your fight flight response or freeze response even is likely to be strongly activated and it's taking you perhaps by surprise, it seems like a bolt out of the blue and suddenly you're just being attacked 99% of the time, it will be all about the other person, the vast majority of it. And if you assume that at the start as your first position, it gives you space to think and it stops your fight, flight, or freeze response being so strongly activated. And it's almost always right. What is there about them that might cause them to react to me this way? Are they threatened by me? Am I reminding them of their indoctoring days of their doctor father, which is one situation that comes to mind. So it's all about them. That can give you space to think. Second position, but only the second, is it about me? I used to have this completely around the other way. If you attacked me, it was all about me. It was all my fault. which was just utterly immobilizing. So when you ask the question, well, is there something for me to learn here? It's the second position, not the first, while holding on to myself and my point of view, not letting it go. Is there a degree of truth in this that I need to consider? Now, that's easier said than done, but this is the best defense, best way of handling attacks. And the vast majority of the time, that will be it's all about them, or the vast majority of it will be true. So, common issues that arise in group dynamics. Associative flow. Associative flow is if Silvia and I are having a conversation, she says something that I'm not that interested in, I make some response, but and she says something else, and I say probably nothing much at all. That conversation quickly dies. In a group, it's not like that. You get this associative flow. So Sylvia says something, I say something, the next person says something, somebody else says something, someone else says something, and someone else says something. As the group leader, you know that the associative flow is unproductive and unhelpful because you're getting mildly irritated, a little bit frustrated. And you can use that. Now, you need a bit of self-awareness to realize that this is not your other stuff being activated, but most of the time it won't be. So if it's moved off topic, I notice we've moved off topic, let's come back to. Um, be alert to your irritation, or the other thing is getting bored. Because if you're getting a bit irritated and getting bored, so are other people in that in the group also, almost certainly, the vast majority of the time. Interrupt the associative flow. The moment you start to get bored, a little bit irritated, you might give it a moment longer to see if it's going to come back on track. Usually it won't, or it won't come back on track after wasting too much time. Interrupt the associative flow. John, can I interrupt you there? I know we've moved off topic. Let's come back to person talking too much. Um, the person who's talking too much needs to be interrupted. How do you know they're talking too much? Because you're getting irritated, you're getting a bit bored, and you're thinking that the other people in the group, many of them will be feeling the same thing. Again, you interrupt them. So John is talking too much, Jenny's talking too much, and you interrupt. Jenny, can I hold you there? Not stop. Can I stop you there? More confrontational. Jenny, can I hold you there? More relational and connecting. Validate. I can see you've got lots of good thoughts about this, but what do others think? So hold, validate, what do others think? Now I'm going to get you to actually say that. We're going to say that 4 or 5 times just to get it into our heads. So we're going to interrupt the person, and then we're going to say hold, validate, what do others think. So here we go. Hold, validate, what do others think? 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 It's a little bit, it's minimally jarring to the person who's talking too much. And at the bit in the middle there, you're holding them, not stopping them, validate them before you go straight on to what do others think. Very useful. And the number of we've all been in many groups where the talker talks too much, they're not aware of it. Of course, when the talker gets into a flow, the sense of time contracts, and you think you've been talking for a minute and you've been talking for three. So we're not often very good judges of how long we've been talking for. Actively invite unspoken disagreements, energy. So we will all know of situations in groups where it's been going along fine, the discussion, and then suddenly the energy's gone out of the discussion, and we're thinking, oh, where are we going to go from here? What do we do now? Um, and at times the energy goes out of a discussion because the conversation has genuinely come to an end in a healthy, appropriate way. But plenty of times the energy goes down and you know that conversation hasn't really come to an end. So, as a group facilitator, we need to actively invite the unspoken disagreements. The energy goes down. Um, and I might say that, look, I notice the energy in this conversation has gone off. That's quite often due to the fact that some of us actually don't agree with what's been said. And it's really important for us to hear the alternative points of view. Sometimes it's hard to disagree when it seems everyone's thinking the same way. Who's got a different point of view? And the facilitator, the leader, invites the different point of view. And for some of us, that will be a bit threatening to do that. The price to pay of not doing it is we end up with decisions which people are less committed to. Um, they have the energy and the effort to get those decisions actually enacted is much greater, and it's much more likely to fall over. So actively inviting unspoken disagreements. Embrace creative tension rather than run away from it. We want unity on the other side of the creative tension, on the other side of the disagreements and the differences, not on this side of those disagreements. So thank you for listening, everyone. Any thoughts?
Can I just continue on that one about
Yeah,
dealing with
yes.
conflicts? Sorry, I put my video back on. Um, Dealing with conflicts in a group situation, I'm just thinking of situations in which every group has its like kind of patterns and rules of putting down or suppressing disagreement. Like you get the kind of roll of the eye, or just a, you might get glared at, or there'll be some kind of snarky comment, or often the ways in which power works to suppress conflict in our church meetings are quite subtle. Have you got any kind of tips for us about how to notice and creatively handle um, those things?
Yes.
You know what I mean?
So I would, and I've done this in groups, Silvia, before, is and it depends on who you're talking to, but it might be something like, um, if we, as followers of Jesus, if we're really going to love each other, and you might use some other word, care, we're going to care and respect each other, then I really want to know what you think. I don't want you just to go along with me, um, and be authentic about that. If I love and respect you, I want to know what you really think. And it's important for us, for our for our relationships and for what we're doing here, that people are able to say what they think and to voice their unspoken disagreements. And yeah, that might be uncomfortable for us, but we need to be able to deal with that, because on the other side, we're actually going to make better decisions and we're going to be more effective as a group. So I would choose just the choice of words depending on sometimes the level of spirituality actually of the people that I'm talking to, but it'll be something like that. And it's about respect, authenticity, genuineness. And if I care for you and respect you in an adult to adult way, not a parent-child way, adult to adult, then I really want to know what you think.
And I guess the other thing in terms of group process and for me, whether it's a home group or a board of elders, is it useful occasionally to talk about what are the ways that we operate here? What are our group agreements?
Oh, absolutely, Sylvia. And I think that that's generally up to the chairperson, the facilitator, the leader. And as leaders, these are things we need to take initiative in. We as leaders will set the tone of intimacy, openness, honesty, in the groups that we're part of. We will set the tone about the way in which disagreements, are handled.
Great.
So I'm wondering, any other questions?
Yeah, I have one. Just in terms of dealing with a person who only sees that a conflict is resolved when you agree with their perspective.
Yes.
Mm.
So, what do I think about that?
You've got to find some common ground, presumably, that can shift them on if people get kind of barricaded into a position or just feel like it's your way, my way, or the highway. How do
Yes,
you move past that?
I think, Darren, it depends a bit on what the actual issue is as to how I would respond to that. Um, just occasionally people have very strong points of view because they're maybe much more experienced, much more knowledgeable, and there's somebody else who thinks they know a lot more than they do, and they're just making a fundamental mistake when it's appropriate for that person to, dig their toes in. But if that's not the case, I might say something using empathy. Um, this is hard for you, Darren, isn't it? With because I've got such a different point of view, and we want to kind of stay connected, but you've got a very different point of view, and you've got some strong feelings about it. And from your point of view, you've got some really good reasons for this. And this is a hard conversation for us. I'm wondering where the way through might be. We need to see if we can get more on the same page. Can you help me with that? I'm wondering, is there something about, what I've said that actually you do agree with? And open up the conversation and
Hang on,
see what
I'll just
happens.
slow you down there because you said some awesome things in quick succession there, Brett. Yeah, I'm trying to use my summarizing skills. One is it would be great if we could move towards agreement. Can you help me with that? So
Yes.
there you're operating this kind of advanced level collaborative approach,
Yes, it's
which
about
is
how can
wonderful.
we work together on
Yeah,
this
yeah.
rather than
Mm.
uh, even just you know um, yeah. So these are situations when there's conflict where it's often I or me and you, and this is a situation where I'm usually going to find a way to include the word we.
Mm.
So we're in this together. We're working together. How can we work together to get to move through this? And if they can't do it, then the last resort, Darren, would be that you pull rank. And look, I'm sorry, Darren, but it looks like it's just very difficult for us to get on the same page here. I carry the final responsibility here, and if we can't find a way to work this out together to move through this, then I'm sorry, but we really are just going to have to do what I've said. And I know you don't like it. I know that's the last thing you want to hear from me, but that's actually what we're going to have to do. So there'll be plenty of empathy along the way, but also I'm going to be firm and dig my toes in. If it's my responsibility, I carry the can and I have to make a decision.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
I have a question, Brett. Um, how would you approach a situation where you're under a leader who seems to enjoy creating crises in order to assert his authority?
Yes, so he's almost certainly insecure. Um, Perhaps even needs to be the center of attention, maybe some power and control issues. So it would be um, uh, Cyber. I'm concerned that the the desire you have to lead this group and see this group be effective is actually being compromised by the fact that um, we seem to have crisis after crisis, and it seems that plenty of those are avoidable. And I'm concerned that this is going to interfere with your effectiveness in leading this group. And I can see some of the Some of the others are just having trouble getting on board with you. And, and open it up. So it's an I am concerned that, adult to adult, and I'm trying to look for what's in their interest, what they want, and then point out how that's not being met, rather than just looking at it purely from my own perspective.
So if this person doesn't seem to be too much concerned about the effect on other people, in other words, disposing of people, firing them or getting rid of them is kind of a way of demonstrating just how solid their authority figure is. And it's affected a number of people. So how would you get on at that stage?
There's far too many groups led by people who are like that. There's often some narcissistic tendencies, power and control issues. They gravitate to the top of groups, the leadership position, because they need it for their own power and control issues, self-esteem, etc. And those groups are usually highly dysfunctional, burn people off left, right, and center. And if the person wouldn't listen, I'd be leaving that group. They're not fit to be the leader. Wrong person in the wrong job.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
So you're talking about this kind of a process. Obviously, you've got a model which is well considered, Brett, starting from empathy, starting from listening, starting from looking to make that connection, to agree as much as possible, working through those, I guess, those assertiveness things like, I've got a different perspective here, just ways to state, to push ourselves. You talked about this kind of muscle of pushing ourselves out of the conflict avoidance into, we have a disagreement. How are we going to work through this in a way that is mutually respectful? There's tools and there's skills in there to develop around naming what we can have in common. What are the common goals for the group? What's our mission? What are our policies? Like that's the kind of wider picture agreement that we might have. And then you're kind of leading onto the harder end of the real struggles when things just are starting to feel like this relationship is not being respectful. This is not healthy for the organization. This person is not willing to meet us here. And then you're getting into some of these kind of terminating options, which can be, that's where we began our conversation about some of the real damage that conflict can do. If it's not handled well, it does lead eventually to, as you put it with your mum, back to zero in terms of relating. And that's painful, but sometimes that exit is necessary. The only option.
Yeah, that's a good summary. Jesus turned over the tables in the temple. You need to be willing to go to that end of the spectrum, which is very muscular, strong and decisive. And that's not where we start, of course, but we also need to be able to go there. And if you can't go there, you'll end up being exploited by the sort of people Cyber was just talking about.
Oh, that's a powerful statement. Yeah. Oh, if you can't imagine going there, like if we're not willing to bring some of that fight, or if this actually matters to us enough to stay and care about this space, then you'll end up being manipulated. Oh,
you're definitely vulnerable to it. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's a good challenge to finish on. But I just want to be nice and I want everyone to like me all the time.
Yes, exactly.
On that cheerful note, I've got to 2:30.
Well, fortunately, that's rare. But as Cyber points out, it's out there. And those situations are often quite high stakes and do a lot of damage.
Yeah.
And people will often avoid people please because of the powerful person. You're going to get a bit of a thump back often, but they need dealing with sooner rather than later.
On that cheerful point, that's also a little promo for me. One of our seminars coming up, I'm just opening it. Oh, what's it called? Is with on the power triangle, the Cartman power triangle, of how we get hooked into the victim persecutor. Rescuer kind of thing, and we've got a seminar on that coming up, and I'm just trying to find it. I was going to give you the little promo. It's called Talk Justly and Love Mercy, with Dale Campbell, up in Auckland. He's been leading the Auckland Leaders Network up there. So that's on the 28th of August. I'll send you the information. Just another piece of the training puzzle. Good. Well, thank you. Thank you, Brett. I would just going to like to close in prayer, and then you're welcome to go. You can hang around and ask more questions if you'd like to, off video. So, loving Lord Jesus, thank you for the power of your Holy Spirit that pushes us into situations of discomfort, where we can experience your Holy Spirit. Give us courage, make us brave, and give us peace. Make us children of peace, your children, with a peaceful spirit, a respectful spirit. Give us the leadership that you would exercise in us, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you for your attention, everybody.